Hello and welcome to my boss guide for Shinryu within the Royal Magerie. Shinryu is a very complex fight that will put what you have learnt from other Stormblood fights thus far into play, with very little room for error. Firstly, we begin our fight against the boss atop a suspended pillar. His first move, which you will need to be quick to avoid, is Tidal Wave. If you look around the sides of the room, you will see this one water spout. You'll need to go stand next to this, as close as possible. After the cast finishes, it will knock people across the room, further depending on how close you are to the pillar of water. Periodic damage will spike onto the tanks in your party from Shinryu's claws. They do light damage throughout the fight. His second ability is this stack marker on a player. Stack and keep everyone topped up if you're the healer. His third ability is to target a player in your party and pulse purple explosions onto them. This is unavoidable. You get to know this is going to happen by the text box popping up mentioning that Shinryu's right wing is emitting an ominous glow. Straight after this, the text box will tell you his left wing is now emitting an ominous glow. This means his fourth ability, this ice line attack, will happen. Simply move out of the line that's down, wait for it to disappear, then move back into where it was to avoid the next line damage. Some players will get marks above their heads, and Shinryu will begin to cast an ability called Earth Breath. These marked players will need to go to one side of a room and then move over before it finishes casting, as a few seconds later the boss will place AoE cones to avoid where those players were stood. You will see a corrupted ether bar on your screen. Once this is filled, this allows Shinryu to use a powerful ability, which is to strike the platform with lightning. This does very high damage, which people will need to be topped up before to survive. He then takes to the sky to transition the fight into Phase 2. Phase 2 then begins with AoE proximity circles, which you'll need to stand away from as much as possible to limit the amount of damage you take. Quick decisions need to be made and stuck with in the direction you deem most safe. The corners of a room are usually the best bet to look at, and once these go off, eggs will spawn on the platform as well as some damage. These quickly hatch into 3 dragons, 2 Ginryu and 1 Hakinryu. Kill the Hakinryu first and then the other 2, making sure to avoid the next volley of AoE proximity circles as they come down. This next volley adds more dragons to the fight, another Hakinryu and another 2 Ginryu. Your tanks need to try their best here to pick them up, and the DPS need to be quick with killing the adds as to not get overwhelmed. A third set of AoE proximity circles will now land with another set of adds. This time you'll get 5 Ginryu and no Hakinryu. High DPS is required to keep up with the amount of adds that could potentially be up in front of you at this point. Each of the adds on this wave can do line AoEs that you simply need to avoid as best you can. A lot of the monsters will die before they get to use them pretty much anyway. Once the adds are dead, the boss will begin counting down to a new ability called Protostar Realization. This is a huge AoE that needs to be healed through, and then marks the beginning of the transition into the third phase. However, to get to the third phase, you will need to perform an active time maneuver. Simply spam the button that appears on screen until it's filled to survive. Failure to do so kills you before you even enter Phase 3. Phase 3 then is where the fight gets really interesting. You'll find yourself on this 9x9 square gridded platform in the valleys below Alamigo. This phase is filled with movement abilities. The first you'll see is not long after you land, is this massive dragon charge attack that will attempt to knock you off of the platform. Move as soon as possible to avoid this as soon as you're down on your feet. Shinryu will then start by pulsing green damage spikes on whoever has first and second enmity on the threat table. Not long after the dragon charge, and Shinryu comes back down to be attacked again. 2 of the squares on the platform will change colour. You'll need to move from these squares as his tail is about to smash into them. Full DPS should now switch to this tail as priority to kill it. Every time the tail is destroyed, it does incredible chunk damage to Shinryu's main health bar. Notice the fact that the blue square over there the tail landed on has now cracked. These squares are deemed unsafe as later abilities on them will shatter that square, so simply don't stand near that one throughout the rest of the fight. Another ability then is aspected ice magic in the form of an ice storm. This is an unavoidable AoE that does damage party-wide for your healers to heal through. As the fight progresses, more tail attacks will happen. Killing the tails is also the only real way of killing Shinryu outright, as the tail deaths do huge percentages of Shinryu's health when they die. Remembering that the squares the tails land on start to crack, this also encourages you to kill the tails as soon as possible, as this forms a kind of enrage where you would have nowhere to really stand at the end of the fight. A large circle will appear in the center of the room. This is sand colored in the center. You will need to move away from this as soon as possible to avoid a dragon stomp ability, and then move back into the center. Shinryu will then charge up an ability called Aerial Blast. This is essentially a tornado in the center of the room you need to keep running towards. Failure to do so keeps knocking you back, and eventually a large knockback as the tornado fades. This also does large AoE damage to the group, which you will need to heal through if you're a healer. Next you'll see the ice lines again from Phase 1, stepping out of them and stepping back in to avoid the next set. The tail will come back down soon, and remember, if any of the platforms it lands on were cracked, they will now be destroyed, and anyone stood on one will also be killed, so do not move to a cracked square to avoid the tail. The stack AoE marker will be placed on a player again like in Phase 1, so stack up to soak this. This last part of the fight is all about killing the tail as soon as they are up and avoiding standing near platforms that could fall apart. At around 30%, the boss will now start to employ another ability, these fire chains. These need to be broken by running away from the player you are chained to. At this point, Shinryu will be at 100 corrupted ether again, and a text box will pop up saying the powers of the gods are mine to command. This is an ice attack called Diamond Dust and then Thin Ice. This will make the whole room slippery and does AoE damage to your group. Do not move at all. The ice propels any movement you do like 200% more. You'll be very likely skidded off of the platform and dead before you realise you even moved. Water puddles will then spawn to avoid that do damage if you stand in them. He will then use Rai. This is a pulsing AoE which you must stack on to split the damage. At this point the boss will be flying around and will do another dragon charge across the room. Sprint over to the safe zone as soon as possible to avoid this. Once he lands again, this marks the final burn phase of the fight. There are fire chains to avoid, ice storms to heal through, another dragon punch to run from, and purple markers placed on players' heads which must be spread out, which do AoE damage to those nearby that you do not want to stack. Finally, you should see one more full corrupted ether bar and a judgment bolt attack that does lightning damage to the entire room again. Heal through this and go ham, as much damage as you can possibly muster. Avoid the last few ice lines and kill the tail if it comes up to instantly kill the boss. If not, just focus on that boss's health and he should die. This was a slightly longer video than I would usually do, due to the amount of different mechanics and how intense it was. Hopefully you still enjoyed this. I did enjoy making this. Thank you very much for watching. Consider subscribing if you want more, and I'll see you next time.